To you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Liz. I'm really pleased to be immediately following Ian, somebody who I did actually meet all those years ago. Is it really that long ago, Ian? During the miners' strike, on a picket line at his pit and on the many demonstrations that we took part in during. Yeah, you don't need to say it out loud, Ian, we know. But I mean, so much of what Ian said is so important there, and just where he finished, I think, is really important. Unfortunately, that was a struggle that we lost. It's a struggle that we still remember 40 years later because of its scale, its significance, and the solidarity that was shown. All the things that Ian talked about. Well, the other things that happened, of course, which was magnificent during the miners' strike, was the role of women. Women taking the lead at the forefront in terms of organising, discussing, agitating, etc. Unfortunately, the defeat led to a period in which the working class of this country and internationally have been subject to the horrors of neoliberalism, deregulation, privatisation, and it is in these last 40 years, by the way, as a result of that defeat and the ascendance of that model of capitalism, it's in those last 40 years that we've seen the real escalation of the climate crisis that is with us today, in terms of the way that that ushered in a kind of system based on prioritisation of profit, but without any kind of slowing that down, resisting it, the deregulation, it wasn't nationalisation, it wasn't workers' control, but there was at least an attempt to understand those industries providing some kind of public service rather than simply let the market rip. And as the market has been let rip over the last 40 years, one of the consequences of the market being let rip is the escalation of the climate crisis that we are facing today. I am glad that we remember the miners' strike, though, and I'm really glad that at this 40th anniversary, more and more people are asking questions about that period of time, and I hope that what Ian has to say does finish off that idea that somehow, which unfortunately some in our own movement suggest, that the miners' strike was somehow a battle over the question of the climate. It was absolutely, never was, in any way, shape or form, a battle over the question of the climate. It was quite simply a class war with the ruling powers of this system trying to destroy the working class and its bodies of resistance. Our balance sheet, that's what our opening session is about today. I really appreciate what everybody has said on this platform. I just want to pick up on one of the things that John has said. We absolutely have made progress. I've been campaigning it with this kind of approach that climate and the trade union issues are not mutually exclusive for quite some period of time. And we have made progress. And you could see, I think, more that progress in action when the climate strikes took place, when the youth climate strikes took place. So when something, if you like, happens outside of the trade union movement, when the young people took to the streets, particularly using the tactic of the trade union movement, strikes, suddenly it pushed the doors open within the trade union movement. And because of some of the work that we've done, people in this room and others, of laying the basis that the two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, actually we have more in common. Environmentalist trade unions, climate activist trade unions, etc. We have a world to win together. Those seeds had been sown, and it was easier once the movement was on the streets outside to push those doors open. I think we need to remember that only 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I'm losing track, prior to the pandemic, when there was that day of action on the 20th of September, we were able to get lunchtime protest activities which hit loads and loads of workplaces up and down the country where trade unions stood in solidarity with the climate strike. It's probably the high point of some of the work that we've done. But, as John identified, we're not where we want to be. It's not that the climate is not seen as a core activity within the trade union movement, despite the fact that it absolutely is a trade union and a class issue. So we have to be honest about that. So I want to just move to that really part of what I want to talk about. There are some significant challenges. And I'm just going to throw out some of the things that I think are the significant challenges and a couple of ideas about what do we do in order to respond to them. One significant challenge we've got is the urgency of the climate crisis, and that's the truth of it. We haven't got time. The climate crisis is not giving us time. Action needs to be taken. it can't be delayed, but it is being delayed. That's one significant challenge that we've got. We're up against the time. Secondly, the reality of the climate crisis doesn't actually mean that more people become more urgently engaged with climate activism, either in or out of the trade union movement. It could, but it's not an automatic correlation. In fact, the correlation can be in a different direction, and that people feel either overwhelmed by it, fatalistic by it, just not knowing what to do. But I think there's another dynamic for us in terms of trade union activists. The climate crisis becomes more urgent, but because it's a crisis of the system, all of the other crises become more urgent simultaneously. So in everybody's workplace, everybody's union, we are simultaneously facing a further onslaught on our working conditions, on our pay. As Izzy said, trying to, the Tory government trying to weaponise the climate crisis into their culture wars, blaming the climate crisis for the cost of living crisis, blaming the climate response. What response have we actually seen, by the way, as somehow that is what's caused the cost of living crisis, rather than the greed of the oil companies, the energy companies, etc. So it doesn't automatically correlate, and that's definitely an issue for us. We were on the streets last year, we were on strike last year. There were significant and important moments of us fighting back. We have to continue to do those things, but we need to make sure that we are able to pull things together, get some understanding of the connectedness of the climate crisis. Finally, it's not finally, on my list, there's also within our own movement. So we've seen Labour retreat on the climate issue. By the way, remembering that when Labour moved in a better direction, it was under the leadership of Corbyn, and the policies that Corbyn helped to introduce in the Labour Party. But crucially, it was under the impact of the climate strikes and the trade union response to the climate strikes. That's what began to shift Labour policy in the right direction. But we've seen Labour retreat, pathetically retreat, with this acceptance of a right-wing narrative that somehow working class people don't care about the climate, don't care about their environment, don't care about what is happening to the planet. That is a lie. It's absolutely a lie. People do care. They don't want to see their children grow up in a planet that doesn't feel like it has a future. They don't want to grow up in an environment in which the rivers are polluted, in which our workplaces are unbearable and impossible to work in. They do want to grow up in a livable planet. It's a class issue, and it's a popular issue. And interestingly, I've seen very recently on the opinion polls that Labour has been sent a message that they can't guarantee they're going to win some of the seats they think they're going to guarantee, because people are angry with their response on the climate. They're angry with their retreat on the question of the climate, and indeed on Palestine as well. And then we've got some of the unions, and particularly the leadership of the unions in our own movement, the GMB and Unite, that have failed really to fully engaged with either the climate crisis and have accepted far too readily some of the myths that Ian tried to scotch at the beginning of the session, but have also accepted far too readily that somehow the climate and jobs will be mutually exclusive, and therefore have advocated for expansion of oil and gas, pushed Labour to drop their policy on oil and gas, I'm talking GMB and Unite leaderships in particular, and have celebrated airport expansion as bringing jobs, etc. So I'm going to finish on this, Liz. How do we make more progress and more quickly? And this is by no means magic bullets. I don't think there are magic bullets, but let's just run through some things. One, we have to keep doing this. We have to keep doing what we're doing today. We do have to meet together. We do have to have these discussions. We do have to educate, as Sarah said. We have to know what the battles are and how do we win those battles, and that's part of the purpose of today. We have to work with the wider movement. Izzy is so right about that. And we have to ensure that we're back on the streets. We've been away from the streets, I think, for far too long as a climate movement. I think we have to look for an opportunity to be big and collective on the streets again, just as we've seen rightly with the Palestine demonstrations. We have to work with the wider movement, and climate justice must not be a hollow and empty slogan that we take to our meetings or on our demonstrations. For example, there is no climate justice on an occupied land. That is right, why it is so right that we've stood, or most of us have, as climate activists, with the Palestinian demonstrators, pro-Palestinian demonstrators on the streets, calling for a ceasefire, and the other things that Izzy has pointed out. And we have to continue to take the debate into the trade union movement. So I have two things to finish on. One is not to just motion monger, but I do think we do have some responsibilities to take motion systematically into our trade union branches and into our national unions. There is a climate motion that we've helped initiate with others. It's essentially just an attempt to get a solid climate motion. What does it look like to tackle the climate crisis as a trade union, as a class issue, and to get a just transition and transformation? I'm proud to say as an NEU member that motion, amended to fit the circumstances of our union, was passed at our national conference last week. I know it's going to Unison conference, and one of the additions, that's great to hear, that we've added in, coming from Unison colleagues, is to add in calling for a year of union climate campaigning, no later than, I know it sounds a long way away, but it's in there, no later than 2026. It doesn't stop us starting the activism earlier. I think that's an excellent, we can then start to get some unity across the unions, think about some coordinated action. So I'd look for all unions to get that added in, get that passed at every level. As Izzy said, if we were taking those motions about what's happening into our trade union branches, the type of motions that Izzy spoke about the non-proliferation treaty, you get debate, you get discussion, you win arguments, you lose some arguments, but that's good to lose arguments because at least they're being heard, they're being discussed, you can see who's agreeing, who's disagreeing, etc., etc. Finally, I want to finish on this is my very last point. We are living in a deeply crisis-ridden system and society, and you can see it all around you every day, in every way. And in that situation, and it does feel like the early 20th century, it feels like the 1930s, it feels like the same kind of level of crisis in society, we're being presented with two different alternatives. One which looks like more war as a response to the crisis, more competition for resources, to the climate crisis, to any kind of economic crisis, to borders, to scapegoating, to authoritarianism, to clamping down on protest and dissent. That's one alternative that society has been presented with. The other alternative, and this is what I think we have to champion in our trade union activity, in our climate activism, is internationalism. Workers globally face the same issues, we need to unite together. Internationalism, not nationalism. We have to oppose war. There are alternatives, and we have to call for a just transition, and more importantly, a just transformation of our economic system. We need to reframe the trade union debate as not simply a just transition, but a just transformation of the economic system, one which prioritizes the creation of work which can tackle the climate crisis as well as protecting the livelihoods and actually does do something to tackle the climate crisis. I've stopped.
Thank you.